Today we're going to talk about a very, I believe, very interesting and appropriate topic in today's business world, the voice of the customer and how to integrate that feedback into really the field level and help that translate into improved relationships, revenue, and profits. First, I'd like to welcome everyone and kudos. I think excellence comes from a continuous learning process, and we will attempt to add to that for you personally, and thank you for attending. Also, that these best practices and trends that we're doing, I'm bringing to you from the field. What we're going to do at the end of this is present a couple case studies, try to bring this material to life and how organizations are using this today. So as you stay on, you'll be receiving some of those kind of inputs. So let's begin. One of the just some thoughts to begin with that I came across not that long ago is a couple quotes that I think are very apropos here. One is, "Success is a lousy teacher. It seduces smart people into thinking they can't lose," by none other than Bill Gates himself, co-founder of Microsoft. I think if we read into that a little bit, one of the things that that we sometimes may fall into is this trap that we're so smart that we really know our customer. And I'd like to pose a question, for all of us just to think about, do we really know our customer? And secondly, by the infamous Jack Welch of GE, I think he states it very well when he says, "We only have two sources of competitive advantage: the ability to learn more about our customers faster than the competition, and the ability to turn that learning into action and profits faster than the competition." And that quote also, I think, says it very well, because what he's talking about is how important voice of the customer feedback is as it relates to business best practices and how it can give us competitive advantage. So today's goals are pretty simple. One is to talk about voice of the customer feedback and how to employ that or integrate that into our business processes around that, obtaining that customer knowledge that we receive, that intelligence directly from our customer, and the how to transition that customer feedback into customer action planning. And that's critical. That's one of the key themes that we want to talk about today. We really are entering what I believe is a new generation of business practices, and it's really an era of customer feedback analytics. Many of us grew up really understanding our customer, having meetings, needs analysis, assessments. However, now we're in an era where we're transforming data into information, into analytics. So the analytics are opening many businesses' eyes to a little bit more about what their customers thinking or thinking about doing or not doing with them, and that's very critical. So this is the focus of what we're talking about today: is how do we take that voice of the customer, those analytics, and use that in account management as well as sales to translate that into improved relationships, revenues, and profits. The key discussion points today is around VoC, which obviously stands for voice of the customer, the facts and the real important facts and insights that influence client supplier behaviors and relationships. We'll talk a little bit about triangulation today, about knowledge triangulation. It's very critical in business today. Introduce the loyalty index, a term that we've coined around this whole deeper understanding of our customer, and what a customer action plan looks like when you're working with voice of the customer information. And finally, we're going to sort of wrap up with some business best practices relevant to integrating all this into our customer action plan so that we get the results that we're after. Just as a point of reference, it should be pretty obvious to a lot of organizations and people out there. If we look at the left side of your chart, there are, sort of as a case study almost, we've got companies like Apple and Microsoft who have obviously over the last 20, 30 years or so done very well. I think we could all agree that their innovation they brought out all are probably affected or influenced by effective listening to their customers, the marketplace. In a B2B environment, you know, in many of the well-read books that are out there, for example, by Jim Collins on Built to Last or Good to Great, always mentioned are companies like 3M and IBM that certainly leadership makes them a great company. However, I think we should also realize that it's hard to be an effective leader without knowing the market or your customer. And these companies seem to represent the goodness of really understanding their customer pretty well. Not saying that everyone can't do a better job, but they do well. Unfortunately, there's the right side of our slide that we have to take a look at because, you know, there's companies that maybe have not listened as well as they should have. And certainly everybody's familiar with the changes at JCPenney recently and the coupon and the change that had to be made there that didn't work. And that may be, I don't know for sure, an effect of not listening to the customer. New Coke many years ago came out and didn't do that well, but they've come out with other products that have done very well. Eastman Kodak unfortunately made the news over the last few years about what's happened to them relevant to how the market moved on those. A little bit around sort of, if you think back to that book, Who Moved My Cheese, you know, the customer moved on them. But in the B2B world, you know, it's hard to believe that not that many years ago, probably less than 20, some of the critical players in the technology world, Digital Equipment, Data General, Wang Laboratories, were the big players. Today they're just non-existent. Is voice of the customer or lack of voice of the customer the only reason that happened? Absolutely not. However, I think we could all make a pretty compelling business case that their ability to align to an emerging marketplace or to an evolving marketplace as well as their business customers certainly caused some challenges, unexpected challenges in their world. So some grounding principles today: customer knowledge. It's real important, and we're going to speak to this in a little bit. What are those right facts and insights that we need to key in on to highlight current as well as future customer expectations and needs? And I want to emphasize the word future. And the reason I want to emphasize that word is in my travels, what I'm hearing today is that customers actually, and this is hard to believe a little bit, but customers are expecting suppliers to almost answer problems or challenges that the customer doesn't even know they have yet. This whole look into the future and bring that thoughts, those innovation to them. Account management, when I use that term, I'm talking about, you know, a very customer-centric business process where the supplier team works as one in engaging with the customer. And I got to keep in mind as we go through our webinar today that loyalty is really different than satisfaction. So when we talk about voice of the customer, we're really not measuring just the satisfaction of our customer. We're really trying to get a little deeper into the relationship and measure the sort of sustainability of the relationship as that relates to the long-term partnership. Now, I mentioned earlier, what are those right facts and insights to measure? Well, certainly they differ in a B2C world, which is the business to consumer world, and in that first left box where we see emotion, passion, knowledge. Many of those are influences, drivers, that we as individuals or families in some cases use to make decisions. Certainly when we move to the right side of our screen on the B2B world, the business-to-business world, some of those certainly carry over to that because people are at the heart of running businesses and making decisions. However, we need to add or integrate to that to those drivers a lot of these other factors around power and influence and bureaucracy and political environment, the company priorities, value. You know, in the business world today, value is taking a whole new, as a business metric, connotation. It's no longer value add, it's sort of economic value add. If you can't show me the bottom line impact of expense reduction, cost avoidance, and revenue improvement, you're probably not providing economic value add. And then this whole, the core of relationship, internal and external, relevant to a supplier as well as a client relationship. So there's a lot of factors that come into play in a B2B world that make it a little more complex to really manage the overall relationship. Now, when we think of an overall relationship and focus on how can we transform or translate this relationship maybe into a partnership, and that's where we may see some certainly improved relationships, revenue, and profits, we probably need to look at, to look at our account or client organization and us as a supplier, that to know that we have different management levels, but there's what I call high impact knowledge that we need to understand within the relationship. For example, do both parties understand each other's vision, their strategy? A key word in today's business, the relevancy of the supplier or their solution. Relevancy is a critical driver. Performance, whether it be the people or the products and services, how they perform. The measurements and metrics. Many clients' accounts have their set of performance metrics as well as the supplier. Are we all aligning to accomplishment of those measurements and metrics? Is there mutual dependency, which I'm going to speak to in a little while. It's very important to understand that mutual dependency is a key influence to creating very loyal and committed customers. And then impact, which we talked about earlier. It's really, the only real impact people are looking for today is what I would call financial impact, of which we have a tendency to call the economic value proposition. So one of the business best practices going on in our global business world today is a little bit more around triangulation. And when we look at best-in-class organizations that are trying to integrate in voice of customer feedback, it's one of the critical data points in a triangulation of internal voice of their employees relevant to maybe their engagement level with their own organization, as well as their perception of how they do with their customers, industry benchmarks that are available, as well as the external voice of the customer, the VoC. The external voice of the customer is, in many cases, been the missing link in how to do more effective fact-based decision-making. Now, I would also invite us to think about fact-based decision-making, that it could be at a corporate level, it could even be at a sales level or field level, which is real important because that's how we're going to see the real transition of voice of customer feedback into transitioning to improved relationships, revenues, and profits. So just as a quick formality of getting some feedback from our participants today, I have a couple questions. And understand the first question is, do you have a formalized voice of the customer program today? And you can just simply select what best represents your current situation today. Would you say yes? Would you say no, or somewhat? And I think the operative key word here is formalized. And by formalized, many times it's actually a program and or it's a process. So very much like our earlier session, what we're seeing is around 70% of participants today are saying that either no or somewhat, and then definitely around 30% are saying yes. That probably holds very true in what we experience in the marketplace together. As Candy mentioned, the Chapman Group is a sales effectiveness account management organization. We actually also deliver voice of customer feedback for our customers. That's what we see. We see not a very high percentage of organizations today that not only have a voice of the customer formalized voice of customer program, but have integrated into their sales and account management program. The second question, a little bit of a leading question, which I wouldn't call it a trick question, maybe a leading question, is which do you believe offers the greatest revenue potential? Which do you believe offers the greatest revenue potential? Loyal and committed customers, very satisfied customers, or long time customers? Now, what's interesting is the afternoon session here is keying in on something a little better than maybe the early morning session did. Greater than 85% of the participants today are locked into loyal and committed customers, and you're absolutely correct. Now, that's not saying that satisfied customers is not a good thing. That's a great thing. But really our journey here is to measure some of the right measurements and metrics so we can convert long-time customers, satisfied customers, into loyal and committed customers. I mean, that's, in fact, exactly what we do with our clients today over time through some benchmarked information. The other trend that we should be aware of is that there's a significant trend in business that we're seeing today, that there's a lot more opportunity in existing customers than to try to just grow revenue from new business customers. So keep that trend in mind, because when we really learn more about our existing customers, it could open up significant doors. Example, I was in a situation very recently with a client, and they were emphasizing new business clients, and they had a client that represented 50 to 70, that was doing 50 to 75 billion dollars of revenue. That was their customer as a company, and they were certainly managing that customer because they were doing X number of millions of dollars with them as a supplier. But when I looked at their opportunity pipeline and I added up the revenue that their current prospects did, it was something around 10 or 15 billion. And there was a logical question that came out. And the question was, wait a minute, 8 or 10 companies that add up to 25 or 30 billion in revenue don't even exceed the 100 or 80 million dollars this other customer is doing that you already have as a customer. Doesn't that indicate that there's probably some significant mining opportunities of new revenue? So one of the keys of voice of the customer is it opens up maybe many times previously unknown opportunities for increased relationships, revenues, and profits. Now, the core elements of any VoC program, voice of the customer program, are very simply four. There's always a good idea to, and by the way, this is what we work directly with our clients on having an effective program survey design, survey management, the actual script, and the launching of the surveys and the gathering of the information and the reporting, step 3, in the analytics. Most critical, however, is that fourth area, which is transitioning the reports and analytics into action. And we call that closing the loop, using that voice of the customer feedback through some kind of consultative effort. We happen to call it a prescription for success, that a supplier can close the loop with their customer based around critical facts that they've learned from their customer. That's probably the most important step in the whole process once you do have the facts from your customer. Look at the difference between a satisfied customer and a loyal customer. By the way, this is not a study we did. This is a study the Corporate Executive Board did years ago. But there's such a significant delta in what a loyal, committed customer offers a supplier versus a satisfied customer. When you see delta improvements of 14, 31%, portfolio penetration, 43% greater opportunity with a loyal, committed customer to penetrate more of your offerings. And when you want to launch a new product and you want to bring it to the market, look at when you have a loyal, committed client, what their receptivity and opportunity is there. So Voice of the Customer is a program that enables us to move satisfied customers to loyal customers, and that's the segue to improved relationships, revenue, and profits. The Harvard Business Review said it very well when they said a complete and extraordinary customer experience is the key to securing customer loyalty and generating superior long-term financial performance. Now, the term I offered up earlier that we want to sort of rally around is what we call the loyalty index. The loyalty index is a benchmark. It's a number. It's a score that when you do voice of the customer feedback and you're measuring the right facts, the right parts of the relationship, which I'll speak to shortly, we break that loyalty index into really two components. If you look at the bottom right of your screen, a performance component, that's probably as close to what we're all familiar with as a satisfaction metric. And then there's the commitment component, which is really measuring an attitude of our customer. And keeping that in mind, when we get into the actual components of measuring loyalty and commitment, ultimately what we would want to do is really measure critical factors that tie to performance. Now, what we learned many years ago through some studies and readings, for example, of an American philosopher called Josiah Royce, he saw that loyalty was really prevalent in 4 places: religion, family, war, and political institutions, in his study of mankind. Now, looking at that, we drew a parallel and said, wait a minute, religion quite easily could relate to values, the similar values of a supplier and a client. Family could relate to people, that the strongness of the relationship and similarities of the people. War is the competitive situation, and how, for example, a supplier is helping a client succeed, create differentiation, advantage. And political institution is the alignment, the cultural alignment between a client and a supplier. So in fact, the logic that we evolved with, which we call our methodology, is if we were to measure some of those facts that would tell us, you know, the alignment of values and people and competitive advantage and our organizations, which you see in the left column, that would start to help feed us towards getting yeses in the right column. So if we can ask and find out if it's important to maintain a relationship for our client, if they're likely to recommend us, and they're committed to do business with us, over time we should be able to correlate, and this is just a small snapshot of maybe some of the type of areas that we ask questions around. We should be able to correlate what are those critical facts around performance that lead to much more loyal, committed customers. We know that like innovation is becoming very important. We know extraordinary performance of products and solutions. We know ease of doing business and integrity. So over time, what we want to do is translate those facts into our action plan, because if we, for example, if somebody had said they're not committed to do business with us, we should be able to go in specifically at an actionable point of feedback and say, what do we need to do to turn the right side into a yes? And our loyalty index is a composite, a balanced composite of performance measurements as well as the commitment of the customer to move forward with us. We often refer to that as sort of minding the gap. If you travel to the UK and you ride their subway or train system, they're always telling you to mind the gap. That's so you don't fall off the station into and have a little bit of problems there in their station. However, in this particular case, we want to mind the gaps of what the difference is between satisfied, loyal and committed customers from feedback that we receive, so that we can build that into customer action planning and understand the difference between committed and maybe not so committed customers. A question we get quite a bit, and I'd like to deal with it here, is, okay, so who do we need to get receive feedback from to have an effective loyalty index? Well, we know we need to go what we call 3 by 3 by 3, high, wide, and deep. So not only who operationally touches our solutions, we need their leaders as well as senior level leaders to give us feedback so that we have an overall relationship index from a loyalty index standpoint. We also get a question around how often should we do this, and we prescribe that certainly at least every 6 months we should be receiving data points from our customer. Maybe not the same people in our customer, but maybe some people in our customer. One of the facts that quite often gets uncovered is many of our clients identify early on that they just don't have enough or a significant enough high, wide, deep relationship in their client, and it's hard for them to get credible data points, so they put initiatives in place to go higher, wider, deeper in their customer. Ultimately, to convert this into action planning, I need to get data so I can sort of get it into what everybody understands: charts, graphs, and dashboards. One of the key trends today is in the action planning within sales teams or account management teams is to get that metric up there on the dashboard, the loyalty index, amongst maybe other performance measurements and metrics on the dashboard. We work with clients as we actually do that, build those dashboards. Get that up there so it becomes part of our selling and or account management process. And all this is based on a very critical process for optimizing the feedback that you receive. Unfortunately, there are some companies that we still run into that have some pretty elaborate satisfaction surveys, but they end up sort of like in a black hole sometimes, and they never get to the field level people so that they can do something with it. It's used more around market intelligence or business planning. We propose the real value of voice of the customer feedback is having a survey script that has enough data points, sufficient data points, to make it actionable at the field level. And then finally in the process is to make sure that you actually engage the customer, which we call closing the loop, at reasonable intervals. We'll talk a little bit more about that. Okay, so the key to voice of customer programs and feedback and turning it into improved relationships, revenue, and profits is really starting to integrate or utilize that loyalty metric. For example, even in the KPI system, key performance indicator, bonus plan, or within all employees in some cases of the organization, especially all those who touch customers. And I would say there's some reason that maybe all employees should have some component around what the loyalty metric is within their organization. We have seen companies today, some of our clients, that actually have started to work in that as a core metric that they measure their entire success around, certainly in addition to their financial metrics. But I would argue the financial metrics sometimes are what we call outputs, and how do you achieve those extraordinary financial metrics are usually by inputs, sometimes called predictive analytics. And this predictive analytic, a voice of the customer, is that input, that voice of the customer input that can predict, are we going to see those extraordinary financial returns? Now, we have several opportunities to use to integrate in these facts and insights into action planning to improve relationship, revenue, and profits. We recommend that they certainly fit within team strategic account planning. They certainly fit within internal business reviews that you may conduct as an organization. They certainly fit in external business reviews with customers, and they certainly fit in an emerging trend that I'll speak to again shortly on joint and balanced scorecard projects where customers, clients, and suppliers work very intimately together to both have this ultimate win-win. So these are opportunities to integrate that in. So a little bit of what does the transition process look like? To do that, we recommend that you still want to keep doing what you're doing that works around research of previous or existing customer knowledge around financials and commitments and relationships, challenges, expectation. You want to complement that with some loyalty survey results that you can now assess internally and also integrate into account planning. And then you want to take that to your customer and re-engage with the customer around those so that you establish some key checkpoints in the future and follow on surveys to see if you're making progress. Again, reminding ourselves that the loyalty index is a benchmark, so it's sort of this journey between the client and the supplier of how do we escalate to the highest possible level of a partnership together. We believe that this whole thing has to fit within process and not be a random act of courage that you do it once in a while, but really launching feedback surveys with the right questions, the right facts and insights gained, and closing that loop with the customer should be now a natural part of the relationship management process. And I'm talking more than just what we've learned through sales calls or account management calls. I'm talking a little more around some very hard detail and facts that we've gained through, for example, our recommendation is maybe an electronic survey, high, wide, and deep in a client. And the purpose of this is to establish that benchmark, that loyalty benchmark, and then focus on how do we elevate that, because there will be, as you saw, a correlation between a loyal and committed customer and improved revenue and profitability. Now, the key components of the action plan that when you close the loop that we suggest is certainly make sure you got the right customer involvement, the right people within the customer, and this is really under the auspices of what does a customer relationship action plan look like, that you really have worked with the customer and identified what some of those top priorities are, so they're identified as part of the survey or within the survey, that you have this ongoing timeline of right ownership, who's going to do what with the data and with the customer, and that we understand what the key performance indicators, the measurements, metrics. By the way, that again, that's an area that we're seeing a lot of work with our clients around dashboards, that it's very important to have the right dials on the dashboard. And finally, that this is a continuous process, improvement process, so we've got these milestones and checkpoints. We offer up what we call collaborative action planning, and we sort of offer up like a 7-step process, all the way from preparation to getting the client approval to do this, and account team meeting, all the way through the ongoing follow-up meetings. So I would maybe offer that today's participants think about in their organization, have they really formalized their external semi-annual external engagement process with their customer, and have they actually integrated into that process, you know, the voice of the customer feedback that they're receiving, so it becomes part of the dialogue. You know, another case study type example that we've seen out there is we've got clients today that have gotten the voice of the customer. They've established a loyalty index, and they've actually developed a process that they take that information, they assess it, they put it in a PowerPoint, they go actually meet with their customer, they highlight in their PowerPoint areas that the customer said was green, areas that might be not so well, yellow or beige or even red. By the way, don't forget the green. These are areas that your customer thinks you're doing an extraordinary job, and it's important to build from that. They take that kind of report out to their customer. By the way, it opens up a whole nother spectrum of questions and types of meetings you can have with your customer around what's important to them, not just to you. And so highlight the green, make sure they know that their team thinks you're doing this really well, and then surface what's not so well, and that actually becomes part of the action plan, the critical action plan. Another piece of what we're seeing, an emerging trend out there, is the whole thing called a joint and balanced scorecard. And this is really where it's pretty exciting out there in the marketplace, where a client as well as a supplier have agreed to work a little more transparent together, intimately together, and measure each other so that they can create this voice of customer and voice of supplier, and see what they need to do. Basically what they're hoping here, and what we're starting to see, is that 1 + 1 = 4. It's very powerful. So it's a more intimate relationship between the customer as well as the supplier, and this is gaining a lot of momentum also in using voice of the customer feedback and closing the loop with the customer to certainly impact relationships, revenue, and profits. So what really moves the needle up? What are some tangible things that you can do tomorrow or later this afternoon, if you so choose, if you've got a voice of the customer feedback program, or if you don't, execute one, but certainly when you do it, make sure that within about 45 days of that, that with the executive team's support and involvement, you actually re-engage with your customer, and you bring it back. We all know, unfortunately, the world that we all go out and we have at a restaurant or a hotel and we get a survey, a lot of people don't participate because, number one, they never receive any kind of personal feedback back. In this particular case, what we've learned is when you go and re-engage your customer and you make the voice of the customer part of the relationship model, it works and they participate. You want to engage the whole account team in looking at the information, and it's a good idea to train the team on what are we doing, what is the information we're getting, and how do we use it. And finally, establish a culture. Make sure your culture says our customer is important, and we're going to broadcast how we're doing, whether it be a loyalty metric, whatever metric you're using. Embed that into the culture so that you start to get adoption within the organization as it meets with the customer. You know, a great example is we worked with a client who came into an organization in a customer care type role, and there were some challenges. One of the first things he did was work with us, and we launched a Voice of the Customer program. He got significant feedback. He took that feedback and ran it through his own management team and account managers and salespeople, and they distilled it down on an almost by account basis, and they took it out to their account. They met with their account and did exactly what I talked to you about, highlighting in a PowerPoint what's working and what they need to do better. And now they've established this like 6-month interval where they re-survey their customer and they go back and re-engage with their customer. And what it's doing is it's opening up all kinds of new opportunities within their customers that they never thought about before. And the customer is very comfortable that they're listening to them. That's real important, because one of the things that we're very aware of today is many times business opportunities within existing customers could be much more significant than it is by just going out and generating new clients. So keep in mind how important it is to mine the existing and convert the existing relationships into even better relationships, because there's a lot of upside opportunity. All right, so what's in it for you? You know, it's very easy by just simply looking at the one fact that gathering feedback can increase cross-sell and upsell effectiveness by 15 to 20%. What we know is that just getting feedback is going to positively impact you. However, if you get the right feedback and you inculcate it in your organization and you engage the customer, you might well see better numbers than this. And really, it gives you, as Jack Welch said in one of the quotes at the very bottom here, competitive advantage. You get there sooner. You deliver what the customer needs. It has tremendous impact. So let's talk a little bit about what we covered today, and then we'll open it up to some questions. I see we've already started to receive some questions. You know, we've talked about how important the voice of the customer is, how critical it is. We've talked about there is a difference between satisfaction surveys and loyalty surveys. There's really a difference between B2C surveys, business to consumer, versus business to business. We've talked about how important and almost required it is to close the loop with the customer. Bring that information back to the customer. We get questions that some companies say, should this be anonymous? I say, no. It should be where customers have the ability to tell you what they're thinking or thinking about doing, and so that you can re-engage with them. When I reach out and I speak, I want my supplier to help us. We want to put that kind of thinking and culture in our company, that customer-centric, the feedback of the customer, part of our culture. And we want to make sure that the voice of the customer data that we receive flows all the way down into our sales plan, into our territory plan, in our strategic account management plan. All these are operationalize them at the field level. That's what we want to make sure we do. So Candy, I know that we've got some questions already. You want to share back with what we've got?
Sure. We have one, I think this is a great question, asking about good resources for implementing a VoC program inside a B2B company. So I think this is directed towards a new program as opposed to developing a current one.
It's a great question. I mean, it is a little bit of an emerging trend, and I think I presented a fairly high degree of sophistication around a program like this. You know, without sounding sort of like I'm selling the Chapman Group to you, but certainly that's one of the things we do. And there are, you know, some other organizations that do similar. We've sort of coined the loyalty index as our thing. I think what's most important, though, as you look at external resources, I would make my piece of advice is make sure that those resources help you integrate both the voice of the customer information into sales and account planning. That's where the rubber hits the road. So you want to work with an organization that can help do that very well.
Okay, we got another question asking, what kind of challenges are there in implementing a VoC program?
Well, you've got some of the basics. You know, one is certainly resources and time, and under resources, there's a couple things that fit. I think everybody's busy. A lot of companies have right-sized themselves to turning everybody into a 60-hour work week or something. But I think resources is a challenge. That's why outside help. Really, what a company really should be wanting to do is have this facts and what we call prescription for success delivered to them so they can act on it. I would say they would want to, much like many organizations have done in the past, is they've outsourced financial services, IT services. This might be something that because of limited resources they consider outsourcing. The other challenge is making sure you budget for it. And the other challenge is making sure everybody within the organization, top to bottom, is signed up for the value of it and the involvement in it so that you can actually get the greatest return on that. For example, sales leaders, account management teams, etc. So it doesn't sit on a bookshelf or within a computer somewhere.
Okay, so we have one question asking about customers' reactions. Do customers complain about being over-surveyed in a VoC program?
Another good question. What we're seeing in the world we live in today, I don't know how you are, but the email box is pretty full, and quite often there's a lot of surveys. What we're talking about here today is a lot different than what you see in your email box today. We're talking about a program that you've actually gone out, made your customer aware of, and in some cases even put it into the relationship agreements that says, look, we're going to ask for your feedback periodically, and we're going to bring that feedback back to you as part of the relationship model. So when you do it that way, we see a lot less resistance to taking surveys. Certainly you got to be sensitive to the size of the survey, the number of times you do it to a single person. But when it's integrated into the relationship process, we don't see anywhere near the resistance, especially when the customer realizes that through their voice to you, this is the way they're going to influence your behavior to help them realize their future challenges and opportunities.
Okay, and if anyone else wants to ask a question before we wrap up, you can go ahead and submit it using the question box. We have one other. This one asks, Dennis, how can you quantify that a VoC program has converted to ROI?
We live in that world. Everybody wants to know what's the return on investment. I'll use a couple facts that we've seen through SAMA. SAMA is the Strategic Account Management Association. I'm proud to say I'm on the board of directors. It's headquartered out of Chicago. It's a great organization on the topic, knowledge share around strategic account management. We publish a lot of facts and figures. One of them we've published is that an effective SAM program, Strategic Account Management Program, can see anywhere from an 8 to 16% improvement versus traditional sales. When we look at our customers and we see them effectively executing voice of the customer, I would say that we can quantify it's more on the high side of that number than the low side. So one of the things we strongly recommend is we look at comparisons between what they were doing prior and where they are today, and I would say it's we're getting facts in today that the numbers are pretty significant. I don't think we have any new questions that have come in, so I'd like to do a quick wrap up. I mentioned SAMA. If anybody wants more information about that, feel free to contact me. It's a great organization. They're actually celebrating next year their 50th year in business. The Chapman Group, which is us at chapmanhq.com, we're proud to say that we do exactly everything we talked about today, and but more importantly, we try to share that thought leadership with you. We're celebrating our 25th year in business in June. And finally, listen, thank you for attending. And you've done a great job by just attending and trying to get smarter. People ask me, what's a success to be highly successful in today's competitive global business economy? And I say two words, harder and smarter. So today was certainly a step in, hopefully in that direction, and hopefully I gave you that one nugget to help you do a better job tomorrow. Thanks again, and I look forward to speaking to you in a very near future.